Fantastic, George. Well, thanks for taking the time to speak to us today. We've got George R., who was part of the Bucks County group, right, George, that was involved in certain chapters of the basic text, I think primarily 8 and 10, which would love to talk to you about today. Maybe as well the mechanics of getting it done, how pivotal it was to the growth of the spread of the program. And maybe we can get into specific lines and kind of how they came about, because a lot of questions we get are, and Pete helped shed light on this, where it was just typewriters and meetings, and taking down notes, and that's what fed in, because I know it's group conscience text, every line's been prayed over, it's very spiritual in nature. So just maybe we can begin by talking about your involvement and how it began.
So we had the 3 meetings going, and the 3rd meeting was started by Phil and Kenny. They were good friends, and they started a step meeting, which I really didn't understand. I had really no idea that steps, I young and dumb, and I knew it all. Okay, steps I thought were like somebody took notes at people that lived clean for a while, and that's how those are things that they accomplished just by staying clean. Okay, I didn't realize that this was, I really had no idea, and I really wasn't looking for, because I went through a program where I had a piece of paper that said I was recovered, so so I was good, but so we actually took the step book, and it wasn't my idea. I'm guessing it was Kenny's or Phil's, but I really don't know who. But we started doctoring in the step meeting. We started doctoring the books up, and where it said like Alcoholics Anonymous on the cover, we changed it to Narcotics Anonymous. If it said alcohol in the book, we changed it to drugs, and that's we made it in an NA book, and we really believed that was like an NA thing,
Yeah.
At this point, our groups were part of area service, and we had elections at area service, and I wound up getting elected to be the public relations person for Philadelphia area. And the reason why I got elected was I had the clean time. It was a vacant position from the year before, and they didn't have anybody else to fill it, so they voted me in. And so that gave us another meeting at night, because I just scheduled it for a night we didn't have a meeting. So we had a meeting Tuesday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I don't remember what night I made it, but probably Wednesday or Thursday. And pretty much a lot of people showed up. Well, what was our fellowship at the time was probably 14, people or something like that. But for the most part, people showed up for the service meeting, and we actually got a lot accomplished. Pete was a big help. He had the typewriter. Pete was like the adult in the room. He was a little bit
like
older.
the old guy, he says, when
Yes.
he was 25, I think.
Yes, well, I remember a bunch of us talking, and we were like, do you think this guy's gonna make it? He's a little bit older, because we didn't have any older people that really, most of the older people didn't stick around with us, because we were just a bunch of dumb kids. I mean, we weren't trying to exclude them, but they kind of excluded themselves, I would say, for the most part. But Pete stuck around, and we wound up getting the public service announcement on the 1980 World Series. Philadelphia was in the World Series in baseball, and we had a public service announcement during one of the games. I actually got interviewed on UHF channel. I don't know if you guys had them over in England, but we had the network channels were 3, 6, and 10, and then we had what was called UHF. It was a second dial on the TV, and it was 17, 29, and 48. But Pete somehow got an interview set up, on Channel 48, and that was, we did posters, but it was, so we were very energetic. We had a lot of energy, and they wanted to do a play. There, like we were trying to figure out more stuff that we could do. And then there was a regional meeting that was coming up, and this would be, I'm gonna say March 1980, might have been February. I don't remember the exact date, but it was early 1980, and we were there was a regional meeting, and we got wind that we weren't supposed to use our doctored up book in the meeting. And we had because we were using another fellowship's literature, and like we couldn't understand it because this book was pure NA if you looked at it, and that was our thinking. And of course, there was nobody teaching us traditions or anything like that. None of us had sponsors, and so there was a guy coming to the meeting, Bob P. from Pittsburgh, who was the World Service Public Relations chairperson, and I was public relations for Philadelphia. So I really wanted to go to talk to him about public relations, but everybody else wanted to go because they wanted to talk about our book, and like we wanted to use the book, and we just wanted to show him how great a job we did, so that he would give us thumbs up on using the AA book in our meeting.
Okay, so just to jump in there, so you're using the AA book, and it's doctored, and it's working for you to an extent, you're finding, and the hope was that because NA didn't have its own basic text at that point, you were saying, look, this is really helping advance our recovery, and maybe it should be adopted by other areas. Was that the case that was to be?
I don't know, adopted. We just wanted to use it in our meeting.
Yeah,
we weren't really looking, other than our own personal needs. How can you have a step meeting if you don't have a step book? Okay, and so that was what, so we were copying, I guess, probably how some of the AA meetings in the area did it. I'm not really sure, to be honest with you, but we kind of felt like we had to have something to read and discuss. And without that, like, what are we going to do? So we went there to show him how, that like we're not violating, we crossed any existence of AA out of the book, so we go to the meeting, and the first thing that, like, we want to show this guy, he said, I don't need to see the book. We said, no, yes you do. He's all right, just answer me this question: what's the copyright say in there? And somebody opens up to the copyright, and it says Alcoholics Anonymous, and he says, you're using another fellowship's book. And one of us said, well, we can change that. And he goes, no, you can't change the copyright. Yeah. I mean, we didn't care. We would have changed it if that would have made him feel better, But so we said, well, if we can't use that, what can we use? And his response was that you can use anything that's written by an NA member, you can use in your meeting. And then somebody said, do you mean we can write the NA steps? And he said, well, yeah, if that's, but there is a project going on, a book being written. And back then it was called the NA Big Book. And he said, if you're going to start writing steps, then you should give this guy, Bo S., a call. He's the World Literature Review chairperson. And so we kind of left the meeting. We're going to go write the NA steps, and that's what we immediately started to do. And so that gave us another meeting. So we had the 3 meetings, we had the public relations, now we had the step writing meeting, and how we did it is we basically did a step meeting. I'm guessing that I don't really remember. I remember us recording the meeting. I don't know if we read the AA 12 and 12 and then shared, or whether we just read the step and shared. I shared, but I do remember that we recorded each of our discussion on it, and then from there, Pete typed it up, and then it was after it was all done, we brought it to the area, and actually, I think it went to the region, and it was, I don't know if other groups in the region wanted to use it. We were a bunch of kids. Okay, so, and that's how probably most, some of the older folks might have viewed us. So us kind of handing them steps that we worked on, it probably was diminishing in their view of its value, but I don't, you'd have to ask somebody that remembers that. But I remember turning them in. But shortly after, regardless of how they felt about it, shortly after that, the gray book came out. Whether it was 6 months, so if anybody did use what we passed out once the gray book came out, I'm pretty sure that most people started using that in their meeting.
So do you think the material that you guys were producing, because maybe other groups were also writing on steps and any steps for the grey book or the grey form, did you recognize any of your material going into it when you saw the review copy?
Okay, I'm gonna say no, but I'm gonna give you. So I attended 4 literature conferences. The first one I attended was the Second World Literature Conference.
And this is, just to be clear, this is in the run up to getting the book ready when contributions were coming in and material was being reviewed, right?
Okay, but that's what I want to explain to you is at the Second World Literature Conference, Bo had pulled out 2 big footlockers of literature. Okay, and Greg Pierce had said, our book is already written, it's in here. We need to figure out how to extract it from the footlockers. So our step, not our step, our literature review committees wasn't all about writing in the process of the book.
Okay.
It was about assembling the book because it was already written. All right, we did do some writing, and in the steps, when they were, so most of all the chapters were done through a cut and paste process. Okay, and that's how we came up with the gray book. But I do remember the steps. In order to get into that workshop, you had to work the steps with a sponsor. Okay, and as I told you, I hadn't worked any steps yet. So I mean, I think that's what was suggested. I don't know how, but I really didn't, I didn't participate in that. If there was, and again, that wouldn't be when I went to Memphis, I brought the cut and paste that we worked on in chapters 8 and chapters 10. Bucks County worked on chapter 8, Philly worked on chapter 10. I really don't know the steps that we wrote, whether they were actually submitted. I'm going to say that they were, but I don't really remember submitting them. And I probably did, or maybe Pete did, Al could have, but like in my head, I don't remember that process. But really, I never looked through the book to see, for stuff it was never about taking credit for anything for me. So I've never really looked for that.
And we've kind of missed the point as well, maybe, that you guys were working on. I just know from chatting to Pete that your group was involved in chapter 8, right? We do recover. All
right, so let me explain how that worked. Okay.
Yeah.
So because maybe you don't, I don't know what you know or don't know. So so after we started writing the steps, one of the things when Bob P told us that we could write them, he said, if you're going to do that, you should contact Bo S. Here's his phone number. So somewhere in the, second, third step, somebody said, aren't we supposed to call that guy from World? And, we're a bunch of kids. So well, I call him, you call him, I call him, So finally, Kenny, who was his apartment, said, "It's my phone. I'll dial." George, you got the most clean time here. You talk to him. And he
What was
handed me-
your clean time at that point, George, out of interest?
So that would be,
This is 80, is it early?
it'll be out of 3 years clean.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah.
All right, my clean date's February 27th, so it was definitely 1980, so 3 years, and it would have been before. We were writing the steps before the East Coast Convention, which was June 27th, 1980. So somewhere between March and June. Okay, that's about as best I can narrow it down for you. But anyway, so I called Bo, and I'll give you the funny story because everybody loves it. We had a BO and then S period. So I asked for Boo, and he said, "This is Bo," and I said, This is George R. I'm from the Bristol group. We're writing the NA steps." And he started going, "Hallelujah, hallelujah," and I put my hand over the phone, and I said, "Guys, I think we got a preacher on the phone," because he was hallelujah. Okay, now I start getting goosebumps when I tell this part. They were meeting in the Rising Sun Clubhouse in Marietta, Georgia, working on the NA Big Book at the same time that I made that phone call from our group in Bristol, Pennsylvania, writing the NA steps at Kenny and Phil's apartment. There was probably about 14 people in each place, and neither one of us knew about the other, and we were doing the same thing at the same time. It was pretty, one of them things that you're in the right place, at the right time. So Bo asked me a couple questions. He asked me, how long we were meeting. He asked me if we were going to the East Coast Convention. I told him we were. And he said they were thinking about going, but because of 3 Mile Island, that was a nuclear plant that almost blew up. The ride from Atlanta to the convention was right through the zone where the government said there was no radiation, but most of the people were pretty sure there might have been some radiation, and they didn't want to ride through it. But he said, we want to meet you guys. So he showed up at the convention, and he actually did a workshop there on our book. And he talked about what was being done. I gotta say that what I remember is a lot of the old timers, and anybody over 25 we thought was old, old and old timers. They were all, let me think of the word, negative about the prospect of a book being written.
Was there resistance to it, do you think?
Not resistance, that we've heard this before, it's bullshit, it's never going to happen, we're never going to have our own book, kind of like Charlie Brown with the football. Lucy, swiping it away every time you think you're, and was there, but we believed in it. Like, I mean, we were writing the NA steps, so why would we stop there? We'll just keep on going,
Were you feeling that the material you were getting while you were workshopping in your own group was, when you were reading it back or Pete was typing up and you were looking at it before submitting it, what was did you feel that you were getting somewhere? There was some kind of breakthrough in terms of how addicts can connect and identify. You got me?
Yeah. A helicopter just flew directly overhead, and I couldn't hear anything.
I'm just saying, when you were writing the steps up or Pete was typing them up with the material that was being workshopped, and when you were reading it back, did you feel you were making progress? Did you feel that there was we were connecting to ourselves in a more meaningful way as addicts, maybe in
Yes. Well, yes, we felt like we were, we weren't sponging off another fellowship. We were becoming our own. We were proud that we were part of that. You know, and I'm talking about us doing the steps. And also that we had something that we could use that was ours, like it was, you know, but, you know, it was out of necessity, you know, it wasn't that we were doing this so we could get credit. You know, it was that this is, you know, we want to have a step meeting, this is what we got to do to have one. You know, so that was, you know, was like, you know, it needed to be done. Now, uh, so after we met Bo, uh, Bo suggested there was a NA mini convention in 2 weeks that was being held in Greenville, South Carolina. And he asked me to come there. He had stuff for me and he gave me PI handbooks. He gave me literature review handbooks. He gave me the NA tree,
Yeah.
which I had never seen before. And then he suggested that I go back and form the first World Lit Conference for the book was to write the literature review handbook so that other groups could form using the handbook. So he gave me the handbook and said, you know, you should, you know, set up the committee according to this, you know, and I looked at him and I said, well, I was public relations chair at the time, and my term was coming up. And I said, well, I'm not really sure I'm the guy to do this. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I quit school at 16. My last report card was straight Fs, and my worst subject was English literature. And he kind of does this. And he says, well, you know, I don't see anybody else here. You know, God works in mysterious ways, you know, and, you know, I was like, okay, you know, so I took the stuff back and they elected me as chair of the group. And so I was also, so let me see when, so this was after the East Coast Convention. So at this point, I was ending my term as public relations chair. I was co-chair of the East Coast Convention, and now I'm chairing this literature review committee in Bucks County. Well, we call it Bristol Lit, is what we call it.
Yeah.
So initially, once we finished the steps, we weren't really sure what to do. And Bo had also, I forgot, Bo had sent me home with Rainbow Connections, which was a newsletter that they did in the Marietta area. And so they actually asked for submissions, and somebody in our group wrote an article and sent it in. And then they published it, and then they published their name. I don't know, I'm gonna say Mary S. Bristol Lit. Holy shit, everybody in our group now wanted to write, you know, and submit stuff, you know, to get published, you know, so that's what we started doing, was writing articles. And they gave you suggested topics. So that was some of the writing that we were doing, but not necessarily for the book.
Yeah.
You know, because we really didn't know what to write at this point. And they also were starting to solicit stories. And I'll get into that in a little bit, my view on that, or not view, my experience. But anyway, so this is all going on, and then Bo lets me know that the 10th World Convention is coming up, and after that is going to be the Second World Literature Conference in Lincoln, Nebraska. This is September 1980, and none of us had any money. You know, we were all young kids. I was working for my dad, and he kept insisting how important this was. It was really important. So I sold my washer and dryer for $300. I was able to buy a round trip train ticket to Hutchinson, Kansas. and Bo told me that he would have somebody pick me up. And I wasn't smart enough to get the guy's phone number or anything. I just took Bo for his word that this guy I never met, had no idea what he looked like, was gonna show up at the train station and pick me up. But it was a day and a half ride out and a day and a half ride back. I had $70 in my pocket for the whole. It was 4 days at the World Convention, I think 7 days at in Lincoln, and then a day and a half to and from, so whatever that adds up to, 13, 14 days, something like that, I was gone. For $70. It was gonna be my meal money. But I spent half of it or over half of it in the on the train in the meal car. It was pretty expensive. So when I got to train station, Jim Nichols was there, and he picked me up and kind of was the sort of understanding that, if I showed up, other people would take care of me, he offered to buy me breakfast, and then he offered me steak and eggs. And I was like, you eat steak for breakfast? Like, I never heard of that. And when I got to the convention, Bo had hooked me up with, there were some guys from Pennsylvania. They had a room with 2 double beds, and they had 3 guys. 2 of them were on one bed, one was on the other, and they had half a bed left over. So that's where I slept for the convention. And I remember, when they ever for meals or whatever, they, come on, and they like, it was like not a question, of like people just helped out. It was a pretty cool thing at the convention. So Bo, Greg Pierce, Bob Barrett, Jim Nichols, Motorcycle Ed, a couple other, Hank from Marietta. I don't know if Paige was there. I don't remember. Linda might have been there, little Linda. But they're having like a impromptu session of discussion about when we get to Lincoln, what are we going to do? And they're discussing things about the book. And I'm sitting there and like, I'm a 20-year-old kid, and these guys are, including me, sorry, like these guys are NA giants. And I'm like just in there, just like as an equal. I like, it was unbelievable. I kind of looked around the room in a surreal moment, wondered, why am I the only person from Pennsylvania here? Like, how come there's nobody else here? Like, I don't know. It didn't make sense to me. Like, this should have been, like, there should have been so many people there, wanting to help out, and so after that, we went to Lincoln, and this is where it'll explain some of your questions. Okay, so after Greg said that our book is in here, what he suggested then is that we take the little white book and we use that as an outline. So our book's going to have the same chapters, the same name, but we're going to expand the chapters. And that's what we're going to do. So we created an outline, and then I'm really not sure if the outline came first or if we sorted it into chapters first. I'd have to look at the minutes. I'm not really sure. But I remember taking time on the outline. It probably took us a day and a half or something to do. And, we started with who was an addict, and then, just different things underneath to that. Surrender, unmanageability, obsession, compulsion, different things like that. And so what we had to do was, everybody was given like a stack, of papers, and you were to skim read it and decide what chapter you thought that the material that you were reading belonged into. okay? And so that's the bulk of what transpired. There was one other thing, I'll get into that, at the Second World Literature Conference, was that we came up with the outline, we separated the book into 10 different chapters, okay? And then while we were finishing the sort, and I want to give you a little more detail on the sorting process, okay? There was no NA literature. I mean, you had the pamphlets, which half the people had memorized from reading it so much, but you start reading this, and there's some real in-depth stuff about recovery and how to live. And like, there's a copy machine over there. I can go make a copy and bring it back to, my home group. And, but we would read the literature prayer, which is now called the service prayer. I'm not gonna be able to recite it. Too many thoughts firing in my head. But God, according to your divine precepts.
Yeah, make us
So,
instruments of your,
yeah.
yeah.
So we would read that, and that's the reason why we were there. We were there to help distill, the addicts that are still using, trying to get clean. It wasn't about our own purpose or, our own knowledge, or, it was about being a tool to God to use us to, help other people.
Can I just, sorry, George, just to come in there, was this a revelation to you, or was this a premise or a concept that you were already familiar with, or was this being around this group of people, were you now getting a sense of the maybe the weight of responsibility, or the weight of the importance of the work that you were doing through this?
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we read that prayer,
Mm.
okay, you could feel the presence of God, and you knew something special was going on in that room. It was almost like we said that, and they kicked on the fog machine. Everybody got goosebumps, and we were now at Lincoln. I don't know, there might have been 25 people there. It wasn't huge, okay, but people from all different states that I'd never met before. Okay, but when we started working, we worked like we been working together for years. Like, it was just the common bond was boom, like that immediately, especially with the prayer. It was, hard to describe. But I didn't like go on like, part of this, but when you were in it, you could feel it. Like, it was electric. You could feel the presence of God. That's the best way that I could describe it. You knew you were doing God's will, and you were doing the right thing for the right reason. You were right where you were supposed to be, doing what you needed to be doing. So that got done. And then one of the things that happened was Bob Barrett, Jim Nichols, Greg Pearson, I think Motorcycle Ed, went off into like a small workshop while everybody was finishing up the skimming. And I wanted to get through the skimming a little bit more. It was hard. You weren't there to read it for your own purpose. You were there to kind of get a sense of it. And then, as great as that was, turn the page and what chapter that belonged into, and start skimming the next one, and put what chapter, and like it, it'd be nice to kick your feet up and just read it, especially when you come across a good article. But that's not what our purpose was. It wasn't about what I can get out of this. It was about getting through that stack so that it could be sorted into the chapters that it needed to be, sorted into. But while that was
sorry, George, and just one thing about where the material came from. Was it like you guys were doing writing, or Pete was?
No, from the Foot Lockers.
Yeah, but the Foot Lockers
came from Jimmy. That came from Jimmy K. Most of that came from Jimmy K. That over the years, like I was told, that stuff in that Foot Lockers was written by death row inmates. It was written by people that were dying from cancer, that wanted to pass on something from themselves before they died, to help an addict still suffering. It came from all different things, and it was anonymous. We had no idea what the source was from.
See, that's another element that doesn't get talked about enough, maybe. I mean, you know, we know anonymity as a spiritual principle in our fellowship, but the fact that you know, that even at this skimming, sorting, arranging stage, the material was completely anonymous, and we don't know who wrote it, and that's quite a beautiful thing also.
Yes, yes, and that was when you were asking if I could see where we did stuff, that's what I was trying to explain to you, is that it was already written.
Yeah.
It was already written when I got there. You know, I mean, there might have been some additions, but the bulk of the book was inside, you know, take out the stories, 99% of the book was already written before we even started, you know, the process. You know,
From the
it's in my
50s or the
experience.
60s, it could be at the point of 1980, it could be, you know, 20 odd years old, a lot of the material. Or
Absolutely,
yeah,
yes.
okay, okay.
Yeah. I have no idea where it came from, to be honest, you know, like, other than from the office is what I was told. Now, Bo might have had some stuff, because he was a writer and they, you know, they have been, you know, there might have been some stuff from there, but you'd have to talk to Bo, because I really don't know. You know, all I remember is that, you know, those Foot Lockers came from Jimmy K. And, you know, and I remember Greg pointing and said, our book is in here, you know, so so I mentioned those guys that started that workshop. And what they did is they came up with the cut and paste process. What the cut and paste was, we took the outline, you read the first part of the outline, and everybody in the workshop had different pages of chapter one. And, you know, you kind of skim through it so you were familiar with it. And then you would read the first part of the outline. And you would go, does anybody have an opening sentence or paragraph? And you would read through your stuff. If you found something, you would read it. Somebody else might have something else. And I know, like, I did a couple, you know, chapters, so it would go something like, yeah, that's it. You got the one to follow. Yeah, all right, so 1, 2, cut, you know, and that's, and then we might, you know, and then we stay on that until there was nothing else to add. We go to the next part of the outline, you read that, and then, you know, if somebody had something, you cut it out. If not, you go to the next part, you know, and that was until you got through the end of the outline, and that was what was supposed to be in the book. Okay, so what now you had is when I say cut and paste, we cut it out, we glued it to a piece of paper, and so you would have all different writings all on one page, and eventually that would get typed up and edited and reviewed at a later conference. But so they did the first, I'm gonna say 7 pages, it might be 6. I don't, but I remember at the end of the conference, I think Greg read it. Not sure. Be Greg or Bo, but I remember them reading it, and I remember just the whole conference crying because that was the first 7 pages of a book. Nobody had expectations that we'd come out with a page like that. Wasn't really, you know, but like this thing was on its way, you know.
Yeah.
So I think everybody got a copy of the first page.
Yeah.
Of that. I don't know of any copy that's left. But nice to say that I saved it, but you know, I don't know what happened to it. And so I had a day and a half ride back on the train, and I got back. I was fired up to tell everybody, like, man, we got 6 pages done. This thing's happening, you know, and shortly after that, Bo had called me up. So the next conference wasn't, that was, you know, the end of September 1980. The next conference wasn't until January 31st, 81. And Bo called me up and he said, I've been thinking about it. And he said, we have all these literature review committees, local literature review committees in place, like the Bristol group. He said, how about if I was thinking about giving each group a chapter to work on, to do the cut and paste on. Do you think that you could do that? And I said, absolutely. You know, so I thought that was a great idea. So he sent us chapter 8, and we started doing the cut and paste in that. And it went just exactly how, you know, whatever the first thing on the outline was, I read it. we'd ask who has, when we distribute whatever was in the folder for chapter 8 was distributed evenly amongst everybody. And then we, started going through the cut and paste process, putting it together. So I would go around the meetings announcing that we're working on our book. And we call it the NA Big Book. We're working on our NA Big Book. If you would like to help, we were also soliciting stories. And I think that's where in Lincoln, I'll go back to that one more time. I told Greg I couldn't wait to write my story because I wanted to get it in the book, and he said to me, "You better watch out what you wish for." And I said, "How could having your story in the book be a bad thing? That would be so effing cool." And he explained to me that his story was in the little white book. And I didn't know that. And he said, when I went to a meeting in Venice, Los Angeles there, Venice Beach. And he said there's about 80 people in the meeting, which freaked me out. I said, that's like a convention, and he said when he was in the meeting, people were kind of pointing him out, telling other people that his story's in the little white book, and he said, I felt like I had an obligation to Narcotics Anonymous, that how I live affects how other people view Narcotics Anonymous because my story's in the book. And he said, so I feel like I have a higher standard to live up to. And I looked at him. I was like 20 years old. And like, I don't want that responsibility. So I didn't write my story for that reason, but
what were your impressions of, because I've kind of got, I think it might have been Vito that said to me that Greg was kind of the first real intellectual within the, that got involved. I think that's the way he characterized Greg. And he is although, we not to violate tradition 12 or anything like that, but he is a figure that looms large in the movement. What were your takeaways of Greg as someone to do service with, and what he contributed?
I do agree. Greg was, pretty smart. He really understood, how I don't want to say he could see the future, but he understood the growth process that we were going through. A lot of that. When I knew Greg, I think last time I seen Greg, I was probably 23, 22. So I was a young guy. Greg was, like way up here, and I remember him handing me the triangle of self-obsession. And he said, I just finished writing this. Tell me what you think. And it was the approval form, like pre-approval for the pamphlet. And I looked at it and I read it and I'm like, you wrote this by yourself? And he's like, yeah. And I said, how do you even think like that? Like, I go, really? Like all by yourself, really? Like that was my reaction to getting that, so yeah, he was, like really, he understood what NA needed, and he, he definitely had was a brilliant guy, and especially with Narcotics Anonymous, so I asked him to be my sponsor. It really didn't work out, because he was living in Wolf Creek, Oregon, which is 3,000 miles. It's 3 hours different time zone. When I would call him after I got home from work, he would still be at work. Then I would go out to a meeting, then out to the diner. When I got back, he was out to a meeting. By the time he got in, it was 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I was getting up at 6, and he kept telling me get a sponsor in my area, which is eventually what I did. But we didn't have answer machines it just was, a different era as far as, but I really admired the way that he thought, like it made me think, harder, and I kind of always like that. So let me see, where are we at now? Oh, so we started doing the cut and paste on chapter 8. And as I was announcing the meetings, I used to go on Friday night, I used to make an 8 o'clock meeting in Philadelphia. And then I used to go to a midnight meeting in Bucks County. And then every other week I would meet this, well, I think you said you interviewed Billy A.
Yeah.
I would meet Billy at the midnight meeting, and Billy was just starting meetings in Allentown. And he would always beg me to come stay over his house Friday night. And then Saturday morning was the 10:30 meeting. That was the only meeting in Allentown. He would like me to go so he could say, this guy's got more time than me, because he was the only guy that had more than a year clean in the meetings. They were all newcomers. And so I would show up and, and I don't know what, I did that for a period of time, but in the Northeast Philadelphia, the guys there approached me and asked me if we would move our literature review committee to Philadelphia. They wanted to participate in the book. And I said, well, I'm just the chair. Hey, I said, it makes sense to me. What they said is they all traveled with public transportation. Oh, can you still hear me okay?
We got you. There was a little blip, George, but we've got you okay.
Okay, how about now? Is it better? Kind of
perfect.
Okay. So anyway, I said I'd ask them, and I thought that it was a good idea, but when I brought it to the group, oh yeah, so they said by public transportation, it would take them like 3 hours to get there, because they'd have to wait for, like they'd have to take 3 different rides, and there'd be, 15 minutes to 20-minute wait in between, changing buses and stuff like that. And I said, well, I'll ask them, and I did, and the Bristol group said that, we don't want to go into Philadelphia. We're the Bristol group. What are we going to become, the Philadelphia group? And they didn't want to go. And I said, okay. So I went and I told them that, and they said, we kind of figured that would be the response. And I was blown away. I'm like, are you kidding? I'd have thought they'd have said yes, because I really felt embarrassed. Like, the group I was part of said no. And they said, so we talked amongst ourselves and we want you to run a group here. And I said, well, I have all kinds of commitments already. And I said, well, I'll teach you how to run. They said, no, you're the one that has the experience. We want you to do it. And so that's what, eventually I said, okay, I'll do it. And so I remember that meeting was on Tuesday night, because the meeting that I had started was a Tuesday night meeting. And back then, we didn't really have home groups. So that was my meeting. That was George's group, and so if George doesn't show up at his group, I can't imagine that's going to last very long. But I had to give that up because I thought, there was a larger purpose that needed to be done by, by chairing another group, and so I showed up at the first meeting, and it was in what we call row homes in the city, where just they're 18-foot wide houses, attached to each other, and it was in one of these houses. I walked in, and there were so many people in the living room. They were all sitting crisscross on the floor, on chairs. I literally could not get into the room. There was every possible space was taken up by a human being. And I chaired the meeting from the doorway. Okay, I couldn't get into the room. That's, it was really moving to see that many people that wanted to get involved. So I said, I handed out the literature. And I said, everybody take a couple pages and, and I explained how it worked. And I said, this is where the Bristol group let off. And they all looked like they were sucking lemons. And I'm like, is there a problem here? And they said, well, we thought we would get our own chapter. And I was like, I didn't even think about that. I mean, it's all for the book. They said, we want to put Philadelphia's stamp on this book. And so I said, well, it's not really my decision. I'll call Bo. So the conversation with Bo went like this. Well, aren't you guys part of the same area? And I said, well, yes, we are the same area, but I said, it's really two different areas. I'm probably the only common denominator between both groups. I said, I don't think anybody in either group knows each other because, it's a different geographic area, but we are technically part of the same area. But I said, there's 40 people in this meeting. They want to work on the book. I said, worst that could happen is we don't get it done. I said, you have somebody, you have a chapter that nobody's working on. And so he sent me chapter 10. And Philadelphia did chapter 10. We did the cut and paste in chapter 10. Bucks County did the cut and paste in chapter 8. And both of them were submitted to Memphis. Memphis was the next conference, and I brought the two chapters. And so what went on at Memphis was they did it all, everything that was done was typed up. Then it was reviewed, edited, retyped up, reviewed, edited. And then the last stage was, and I thought this was really brilliant. Bo had a local detox. I think it was called Memphis Heads. And what they started doing was they would read the finished product of each chapter. And then they would tell Bo how they felt about it. And one of the things, some of the things that they said was they felt like somebody was following them and writing about them, that they could feel the spirit in the writing talking to them. That this was directly talking to them. And I remember through my brilliance, I now turned 21. I said to him, I said, Bo, why the fuck do we have people like this reading our book? I said, they have no idea about recovery. We should have somebody like Greg reviewing it, because Greg got a lot of clean time. And Bo looked at me and he said, George, if they can't understand what we wrote, we missed our mark. Who do you think we're writing this book for? And it was like, wow, I thought that was really genius. Yes. And you still hear people today, they talk about, like, when they first read the book, how, they feel like somebody's following them around, that the spirit's directly, talking to them. And so, like, that was I remember, like, just being really wowed by that. Yeah. But I want to share a little bit more about the cut and paste before I move on. So when we got to the conference in Memphis, there was quite a few chapters where either the cut and paste wasn't finished. I think there might have been one where it wasn't started, no work was done. And Bo said, I'm going to put George in charge of the cut and paste, the stuff that needs to be cut and paste. I'm going to have George chair the workshops. So after the group conscience, there was a general group conscience. I went up to him and I said, can I talk to you for a second? I said, I've been doing cut and paste, twice a week, and I said, I was really looking forward to the edit and review part. and I said, I feel like I'm being demoted. I'm being stuck down here. And he said, George, I picked you because nobody has done more cut and paste in Narcotics Anonymous than you. And I knew I could put you in charge of it and that the work's going to get done and we can figure out how to do this edit and review thing. We don't have a system down for this yet. And it might take us a while to do that. I'd rather concentrate on that, knowing that this is taken care of, and you're the guy I know that can take care of it. And, so I went from being down here to suddenly being way up here. I felt, pretty important and
Tremendous
also
accolade.
experienced.
Mhm.
Like I didn't realize that, there weren't many people that chaired one chapter, let alone two chapters, so that was pretty cool. At the end of that conference, I actually, Tom McTurnan asked us to give him a ride back to Atlanta. And he said it was on its way, except I lived northeast from Memphis and Atlanta was southeast. And then he mentioned that we could get to see the Rising Sun Clubhouse. It was the only NA clubhouse on the East Coast. It's sold, so we gave him a ride back and we got to see the clubhouse, which was really cool. And then we went back home. Shortly after that conference, the gray books were mailed out.
So they're being mailed out for review at this point.
What's that?
Are these being mailed out for review to members for the wider membership?
Yeah, review and edit, I think is what it has on there.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to talk about it in what happened at Memphis. So Jim Miller was real big on the language and he kept saying something about a style sheet. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. And Bo finally said, well, if you want to do that, then form a workshop, you chair it and get a couple of people to go into the workshop. So me and Jim Miller asked me, he was leaving the following morning to go, he had to go back to work. So he knew that I would stay up all night, like I would have no problem doing that. And there was this girl, Kathy, who was the co-chair of the conference. I forget what her last initial was. But she kind of liked me. So when he asked me, she joined in. And so the three of us stayed up all night, coming up with a style sheet, which was basically AA terminology. It's the last page of the gray book. If you ever, the gray
I'll have
book.
a look at. Yeah, sure.
Okay, but it talks about like it said easy does it, and we had take it easy. We were trying to, it had sober, we came up with clean, sobriety, cleanliness. We were trying to get our language and figure out
where that all happened. That's amazing. Is that where the term clean in the literature came during that process?
I don't. What was the question again?
So is clean already being used instead of sober in any,
No.
or is it through that style guide process that it came about? That's interesting, actually.
Okay. I can't say that I can tell you the moment in time that clicked. Okay, but it was in print. And having something in print definitely changes a lot of things. People see it, they read it, so take it easy did not become a term in Narcotics Anonymous. Clean did. But I don't know it was a result of that, but it was the start of us starting to, like have a common language. Like that was really what the purpose of the style sheet was, is that this is the process that this book, should be using this terminology. And so if the book does, then we should too, if you follow through. But it wasn't like we put that in there and now this had to be used, but it was the start of like, we need to start figuring out our own language. And Jim was really
brilliant.
Like that was one of his things, and I just happened to sit in the workshop and and me, but he couldn't do it by himself. So me and him and Kathy were the workshop that put that together, you know.
Also the book, I mean, even though it's a spiritual text, even the whatever edition you read, it never feels disjointed. I suppose it's like newspapers that have a style guide, and if once the sub editors have rewritten it feels the same all the way through, and I think there's a nice useful uniformity in the book as well, that which a style guide would help.
Yeah, I was not a part of trying to implement that into the book. But I just sat in that workshop, and that was like really the start of that process, like in our literature that I know of anyway. That somebody else has something else. I've never heard anybody trying to come up with NA terminology, but it was written and it was in the gray book. In the last page, and I got to give Jim Miller credit for that, and because that was his idea, and he asked me because he knew that he needed help, I'd be there, so that was.
George, while we're at this point now, I realize we've gone over an hour. I feel that there's so much more to talk about.
Absolutely.
Would you be open to would you have time to do another one of these, like a part 2?
Yes, sure.
This week?
Let's text back and forth and we'll figure it out.
We'll take it offline, because I just think there's so much more, and there's so much great detail which members will appreciate and we've never heard before, and I think to try and condense it now in another 15-20 minutes or however long you've got left, I think we should just set aside another hour, an hour and a half, and just really get through it, because there's some really valuable, amazing stuff.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that in Memphis, I'll give you two cute things, but so I don't know if this was Memphis or Lincoln that it started, but I definitely know Memphis. We were saying this. We were writing this book for addicts that hadn't gotten clean yet.
Yeah.
Addicts that hadn't picked up for the first time yet, and addicts that haven't been born yet. And when I sit in a meeting and I hear somebody share that the basic tech saved their life and they're under 40 years old, sometimes I get tears in my eyes, not for taking credit for my work in the book, but because I think of all those people that had that insight that that's who they were helping. And I get to see the fruits of our labor, and they're no longer here. And it makes me think of those people. And that's what the tears are for, is the insight that they had, to do that for the next generation that's come along, and generations after that and after that, So I'll give you a cute story. When we went to Memphis, I took Teresa, who was 15. She got clean at 15. She was 16 at the time that we went to the conference, and Ted, who was 18. My plan was I'd take a couple people with me and we could share the driving. I failed to ask them if either one of them had a driver's license or knew how to drive. And neither one of them knew how to read a map. On the way there, I drove through a 3-inch snowstorm. They were out cold, and I was, I had rear wheel drive. I'm all over the road. I'm tunnel vision, some point I realized that we seemed to maybe be too far. We went 100 miles too far south on the highway. So we started heading. Now, I think I had worked the whole day. I was planning on sleeping in the car a little bit. I was starting to get really tired. And so we just decided to start heading west, and we would drive like 10, 20 miles. I get out, look at the map, and because we weren't on the highway anymore. We were just going directly west. I wasn't driving 100 miles back. We actually got to a river where the road ended, and there was actually a little ferry, like it was like a raft. 3 cars could go on it. We wound up going over that. And at some point, I said to him, I said, I really can't drive anymore. I said, I'm just like, I'm out, And I said, but there was this girl that I met in Lincoln. Her name was Gina Hilgera. And she told me if I was ever in Nashville to look her up. And I said, so if we can get to Nashville, we could probably crash out at her place, So of course I don't have her number. I don't know where she lives, but why would that stop a good plan, So we decide to check the NA hotline. I didn't know there's no meetings in Nashville at this point. There's no hotline. So I called the AA hotline and I asked them for the last meeting of the night that they have in Nashville. So they give it to us and we go there, get there half an hour after the meeting ended. There's 2 cars in the parking lot. There's 2 old ladies standing in there talking to each other. So I pull up and I said, hey, I'm looking for this young woman named Gina H. And she looks at me and she says, the one working on the drug book? And I go, yeah, that's her. The little old Gina. I said, yeah, that's her. Yeah. And she, well, what do you guys? Well, we come from Pennsylvania, and she told us if we were ever in town to look her up. Like I've been driving forever, and I'm looking for a place to crash. You could take her to her place, tell us where she lives. She said, well, I don't know her address, but I know where she lives. Gina will love to have you over. So she drove, and we followed her, and she took us to Gina's place. And when I got to Gina's place, there was a bunch of guys from Marietta that were already there. There were I don't know, by the time we arrived, there's probably 15 people in her house, all getting ready to head to Memphis. And she's like, I don't have a place for you to sleep. And I looked at her and I said, well, can I sleep in the car then? And in your driveway. And she says, it's too quiet. I said, I can't drive anymore. I can't go, these guys don't know how to drive. I don't know what, So she said, well, if you can fall asleep on the couch, but we're packing. And I said, believe me, that is not going to bother me. I slept on the, I laid down on the couch and I was out instantly, I want to share one thing about Teresa though. So at Memphis, we were discussing the dedication to AA in the book. And Bo kept mentioning Bill W. We want to thank Bill W. for his efforts, gratitude for letting us, and finally Teresa looks up and she goes, who the fuck is Bill W? And everybody went like this, I was embarrassed, and Bo said, no, he goes, this is awesome. He goes, this is the future of Narcotics Anonymous. She's a true Narcotics Anonymous baby. She doesn't know who Bill W. is because she didn't have to go to AA. She's NA, and that's why she doesn't know who Bill W. is. This is the future of Narcotics Anonymous right here. And it was like, wow, that was like a coming of age moment, for me and witnessing our experience in NA, but anyway, I thought that was pretty cool.
It's beautiful because it illustrates the millions or the thousands of stories, and the effort and the lengths that you guys went to, and the the little moments of serendipity and coincidence which allowed all this to happen. I think people will be amazed, and so grateful, a deeper level of gratitude for the lengths that you went to and for your service. We can maybe get into this next time, George, but we talked a little bit about it with Pete about we've maybe got a way to go before we talk about when the book came out and what kind of renaissance it sparked in terms of recovery. Pete said, I said, what was the greatest thing about having a book, Pete? And he was like, well, we're able to do any steps. we started doing any steps for the first time. And it's those little insights which I think are really good. So why don't we stick a pin in it for
Yes, okay.
and then we'll take it offline and arrange part two. Let me just stop the recording. Just stay there.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time today, George. Let me stop this.